In this video, I think we should talk about some semantics. In the last video, we dove into computer code. So we looked at code, sample, pre, var, KBD, things like that. And semantically, they're somewhat different, but when you look at them, a lot of them sort of just look the same. And so this actually brings me to an example of something we talked about early on when we were talking about bold versus strong or italics versus emphasis and which one to use and where. And I like to think that I covered that topic well enough, but just since we're already on the subject of semantics, basically what element has a particular purpose for what use case, I think it would be good to go over this once again. So let's talk about the difference between strong and bold and the difference between emphasis and italics. Alrighty, so I have an HTML page here, and I'm just going to, I'm going to save this and call this semantics.html. HTML:5, this is really groovy. I love that. We're going to do a little cleanup here though. Clean that up, clean that up, clean that up. We haven't talked about that yet. And the title is going to be semantics. Man, I love that feature. That is great. Okay, semantics. So when we're talking about the difference between code and samp, we learned last lesson that code is for like file names, for example, and sample is actual code output sample. So if you're a programmer, if you're writing documentation for a program, you might want to put it in samp. Now they look the same, but the difference is when Google or maybe a screen reader hits your website, it's going to say, oh, well, code might be read differently from sample, or it might even narrate it differently or give you some sort of context, be like, well, this is sample code. This one is output code, just like a file name or something, and this one is technically output code. So again, they look sort of the same. Actually, when you render some code, they look identical. At least to me, they look identical in Firefox. But it doesn't stop there. We can also look at bold versus, let's do a line break here. Strong, bold, and let's do horizontal rule, and we can also do italics, italic versus, put a line break there, italic. And so let's open this up in Firefox, and we are going to see, let's make that bigger so we can read it together. Bold versus bold looks the same, italic versus italic looks the same, but when we look at our elements, we have italic here, and we have italic here, and we have bold here, and we have bold here. The difference is how a screen reader reads these. So bold is simply bolded text. A screen reader is going to look over this, and it's going to read it in the same tone, same accent, same emphasis as a regular sentence. Versus this one, strong, is going to have a lot of emphasis on it. And italic, likewise, is going to be visually italicized, but really doesn't mean anything, whereas emphasis adds a little extra emphasis. Now, a good way to look at this is I'm going to use a Star Wars reference just because I think a lot of people are familiar with this one. There is a guy, his name is Darth Vader, and he shouted, Darth Vader, let's do this, Darth Vader, Dark Vader, ha! Fingers are funny. Darth Vader shouted, "No!" But we want to put a lot of emphasis on that, like a lot. So we could write regular text like this. Darth Vader shouted, "No!" That's how a screen reader would read it. Or we could make this bold, regular bold. Was my fault on that one. Let's do, okay, regular bold. So a screen reader would read this, even though it's bold, as Darth Vader shouted, "No!" Versus, let's make this strong. Darth Vader shouted, "No!" So you see the difference in emphasis there? It's like no versus no, 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 something like that. That's the difference for a screen reader. And believe me, that's important. That is very important for a large amount of people on the internet. It is incredibly important for them. And when we're looking at an example, like, let's talk about gossip. So, given the context that people in an office are talking about another person in the office, and then one person comes up and says, "Really?" You know, it's like really versus emphasized really. Let's do this. So regular text is like really. Italicized text would be really. And emphasized text is like really. Almost like you're adding more sarcasm, but not necessarily sarcastic because that's based on context. So again, this is important for people who are using screen readers. And actually it's becoming more and more important for all of us because as more of us use services like Alexa, even Google, when I ask Google to say something or to look something up, it's going to look it up and it's going to try to read it as if it's a human. And if we can give it the proper context, it will actually sound pretty decent. So for this video, there is no task. We've already covered this a little bit in a previous video. I think we covered this well enough in the computer code language lesson. That was the last lesson. And I think between the Darth Vader, or the Dark Vader, as I typed it, the Dark Vader example and the Office gossip example, I think we have this covered, so we probably don't need to do anything for this. Now, if you have a screen reader, you could probably try to load this up on your screen reader and see what the difference is. I don't have one, so I can't actually show you what the difference is. I just know that that is what the difference is. Okay, so I think that's enough talk about semantics. What's the difference between bold and strong and italics and emphasis and all that kind of stuff. So let's head on over to another lesson where we are going to learn more about head elements, and we're going to look at a few of them in there.